Speaking of this war, the one in Israel, not the one in Ukraine, we've covered that quite extensively. Again, I think that whether you want the United States to continue to shovel billions of dollars to Israel to fuel this war, to fuel the destruction of Gaza, it is our responsibility to tell you about what actually is taking place in Gaza so you can decide whether or not you're in support of it. I mean, informing you about a war that you support or that you oppose is fundamental to a journalist. So that's what we're going to do. First of all, here from the New York Times on February 6th, and I'd like to remind you that the New York Times editorially supports the Israeli war in Gaza. They think the Israelis are justified in light of October 7th from having invaded Gaza, from having bombed Gaza. The New York Times is pro-Israel. It has always been a pro-Israel newspaper. Everyone believes the media is biased against their own view. So hardcore Israel supporters will tell you, oh, the New York Times hates Israel. Really? Why is it then that the editors of the New York Times, the owners of the New York Times, which is the Sulzberger family, the editors of the New York Times, which have generally been, not always now, but for most of its history, Jewish editors who are pro-Israel, have editorially always supported Israel, supported U.S. aid to Israel, and supported the Israeli wars, including the war currently taking place in Gaza. That's the official editorial position of the New York Times. They publish editorials supporting that. That's the truth. That's the undeniable fact. And what they published yesterday was this, quote, what Israel's soldiers' videos reveal, cheering destruction and mocking Gazans. I've seen a lot of these videos myself. You see them every day on TikTok, and they circulate on Twitter and elsewhere, of Israeli soldiers going into little stores, little gift shops in Gaza, and mocking them and destroying them, stealing things, and then blowing them up. Blowing up schools, blowing up universities, blowing up little stores, blowing up homes, and laughing and mocking the Palestinians whose civilian life they're destroying as they do it. Quote, an analysis of social media videos found Israeli soldiers filming themselves in Gaza and destroying what appears to be civilian property. The footage provides a rare and unsanctioned window into the war. Quote, since Israel's invasion in October, soldiers have shared videos from Gaza on social media offering a rare unsanctioned look at operations on the ground. Some have been viewed by a small circle of people, others have reached tens of thousands. The New York Times reviewed hundreds of these videos. Some show unremarkable parts of a soldier's life, but others show soldiers vandalizing local shops and school classrooms, making derogatory comments about Palestinians, bulldozing what appear to be civilian areas, and calling for the building of Israeli settlements in Gaza, an inflammatory idea that is promoted by some far-right Israeli politicians, including ones that are high officials in the cabinet of Benjamin Netanyahu. With Israel's war in Gaza under intense scrutiny, many of the soldiers' videos shot in Gaza have fueled criticism. One was screened and 5 others were also cited as evidence in the case South Africa brought to the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide, a charge Israel has categorically denied. In a video filmed on the outskirts of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza in early January, combat engineering soldiers can be seen smoking hookah pipes before explosions take down residential buildings in the background. They then raise glasses to toast each other. Here's one of the videos that the New York Times obtained of the Israeli soldiers performing theatrically for social media videos that they then posted to social media as they proceed to not only destroy civilian infrastructure and civilian life in Gaza, but celebrate and mock the Palestinians as they do it. Now again, those weapons that they used to blow up these civilian buildings that the entire Muslim world watches are weapons provided by the United States, by you, by American citizens. Here's another video of Israeli soldiers acting like disc jockeys and playing music as they destroy things in Gaza. Here's what the New York Times says about their study of these videos. Quote, In some of the combat engineers' videos, Israeli soldiers mock Palestinians as they destroy structures and property. In other social media shared on others shared widely on social media, soldiers dedicate the destruction of belongings to the victims of the October 7th attacks and to family members. In one TikTok video, soldiers dedicate the bulldozing of a building to Ayal Golan, an Israeli singer who has called for the complete destruction of Gaza. South Africa cited this video as evidence of what it, quote, called genocidal speech by soldiers in its case against Israel at the ICJ. Here's a third video of the kind the New York Times was describing. And again, watch these and make up your own mind. Elia Golan, our dear brother, we love you. Team 271 Gaza. Khan Younis, this house is for you. For the joy that you gave us. The nation of Israel lives. And as the New York Times said, they were dedicating that to an Israeli singer who had called for Gaza to be turned into a parking lot, to be completely destroyed. So you can see the mentality of at least some Israeli soldiers in what they're doing. They're using American weapons paid for by American taxpayers or American loans from China. And everyone in the entire world knows that. And when they watch what Israel is doing in Gaza, in their minds, everyone understands, everyone in the world, that it's not just an Israeli war, but an American war as well. From the London Review of Books, there's an essay that examines all of the data about the the level and magnitude of destruction that takes place in Gaza and tries to put into words the remarkable extent of just how much civilian life in Gaza has been irreparably destroyed. It's a place that's essentially uninhabitable for civilian life, even though 2.2 million people, half of whom are children, continue to actually exist there for now. And it's entitled Rubble from Bone. Tom Stevenson writes about Operation Iron Swords. Quote, in the first 3 months of Israel's attack on Gaza, around 25,000 Palestinians were killed and around 60,000 wounded. 70% of them women and children. Around 80% of the population of Gaza has been displaced. The rate of killing has been higher than in most wars this century, sometimes reaching more than 2,000 deaths a week. There have been airstrikes on ambulances, airstrikes on bakeries, airstrikes on UN schools serving as shelters. Israeli forces have killed more than 150 UN staff. Now we know there's allegations that members of the UN Relief Agency participated on October 7th. This evidence is extremely sparse, and we're going to cover that allegation. We're looking into it. We're talking to a couple of experts that we're going to bring onto the show. But even if you believe that, because you want to believe that because Israel said it, this does not justify anything of what we are currently covering. Quote, Palestinian men and boys between the ages of 12 and 70 are stripped, cuffed, blindfolded, and then loaded onto the backs of trucks to be taken for interrogation. Some have numbers written on their arms. Hundreds detained in Gaza have been transported to the desert prison of Kitzot, near the border with Egypt. Others have probably been taken to nearby military bases. Some men who were taken prisoner in Beit Lahiya were stripped and transported to fenced-off camps where for days they were tied up, beaten, and tortured. Others have disappeared. The IDF has subsequently said that between 85 and 90% of these detainees were civilians. Let me repeat that. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, has subsequently said that between 85 and 90% of those detainees, the ones we were just talking about, are civilians. The UN assessment is that a quarter of the total population is suffering catastrophic famine. 81% of the people worldwide currently in that category. Gaza has the highest percentage of people facing acute food insecurity ever recorded. The naval blockade could easily be lifted to allow aid to be shipped in. Hundreds of trucks of aid and food wait in Egypt, but are effectively prevented from entering. So all of this ties together. There is no way to argue, there is no way to argue cogently or rationally or truthfully that paying for the war in Israel, having the entire world know that we're behind it and are arming it, improves the lives of American citizens. It does the opposite. There have been multiple warnings from our own government from the State Department, advisories saying that it is far more dangerous than ever for American citizens to travel all over the world because the risk of attack, anti-American attack, by people angry that we're paying for the war in Israel, that we're behind the war in Israel, increases the threat to the lives of American citizens, to our physical security. American troops have been bombed and now killed throughout that region by people angry at the United States for supporting this war in Israel. We're going further into debt to finance this war. And why? Why are American citizens being subjected to greater harm, physical threats, economic harm, having our military bases attacked, our soldiers killed, all to finance this war in Israel that is basically at this point doing nothing but wiping out civilian life? If you claim that you're America First conservative, that you think the government should be prioritizing the interest and the lives of American citizens first, as pretty much the entire Trump movement does, I just want someone, I've been asking for a long time, somebody come on my show who identifies as America First and explain to me how that can be reconciled with having the United States government finance Israel's war, this war that's doing all of this, especially given the vast difference in the standard of living of millions of Israelis compared to millions of Americans. The fact that Israelis live 5 to 7 years longer than American citizens do. I realize that Israel has a lot of intense importance to a lot of Americans for religious, cultural reasons. And I also realize that a lot of people support Israel because for some reason they've been convinced that the existential threat to the United States is not from the US security state or from globalist institutions, but somehow are from Muslims. And so they get happy when they see any country killing Muslims and want to have the United States fund it for their own enjoyment. That is not, again, anything having to do with the lives of American citizens. That might have something to do with your psyche, your religious convictions, your cultural attachments to a foreign country. It has nothing to do with improving the lives of American citizens. And that's to say nothing of the morality of financing a war that is more geared to destroying civilian life and has succeeded in killing civilians and imposing enormous amounts of suffering on civilians, on children and women and innocent men than any war in this century and arguably any war since World War II. It is an atrocity on every level that the United States government not only funds this war, but is so desperate, has it as such a top priority, along with financing the war in Ukraine. And again, we've covered the war in Ukraine. Everything I just said about the war in Gaza and financing Israel applies at least as much, if not more, to financing the war in Ukraine. And yet right now, everybody in Congress is focused only on one thing: sending your money not to improve your lives or the lives of your community or to better the country, to make it safer, to make it more prosperous, to increase the standard of living or life expectancy. Instead, they're all desperately fighting with each other over how they can most easily justify sending enormous amounts of money to multiple foreign countries to finance their wars. That's the real priority of both political parties in Washington. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.